Those axons can be myelinated. And here we can see, when you look next to this ganglion here, we've got this nerve fibers running, these axons running. If we take them up to slightly higher power, you can even see here that typical Schwann cell sheath with the little pale axon in the center. Now, when you look at this, you can see that not all of these axons are myelinated. So this represents a mixed nerve where you've got some myelinated fibers, some unmyelinated fibers sitting next to each other. All right?
I have a question.
Yes.
If you were to tag the neurons in the ganglion, would we have to say neuron cells of ganglia? You know, or would neurons?
If I asked you just to name this cell, neuron would be fine. All right. If you called it a motor neuron, you would be wrong. Okay. If you're in the central nervous system, motor neuron would be correct, right? Because your motor neurons are in the central nervous system, whereas these guys are not. Okay, so just don't call these guys motor neurons. But I would not expect you to have to write the whole thing about this is a neuron that's sitting in a ganglion. All right. So I could ask you to name this cell. I could ask you to name this cell, the one that my arrow is on top of, the nucleus. Okay, satellite cell. And then I could ask you to name this structure. Right, just giving you a picture of this. What structure are these cells in? Structure. Oh, I heard it over there. It's in a ganglion. Right. Okay. Any questions with ganglion?
On Wednesday, are we going to take the exam first or the practical first?
Probably easier to take the practical first, just because it's the shorter of the two, and then we can reconvene all of you and do the lecture. So, and because the practical, everybody will be in this room, and then for the lecture, half of you will go to room 6. Yes?
Is it more correct to say cell body or to say neuron?
You just neuron is probably fine. Neuron cell body is a little bit more information about it, but if the fact that you can identify that cell body as belonging to a neuron, that's fine. Okay. But again, be careful, because if it's in the central nervous system, I want motor neuron. All right. And the other thing to keep in mind is when you see that, and you see if I say name this cell, do not call it perikaryon. I know some people get confused with the way the textbook sometimes labels them. Perikaryon means cell body. Okay, it does not mean neuron. It means the contents, the cell body where the nucleus resides and where most of the contents of the cytoplasm reside. So that's the perikaryon. It refers to the cytoplasmic component, not to the name of the cell. So if I ask you to name the cell, please don't call it a perikaryon. All right, so we'll move on to muscle. Now here we're looking at the tongue, and again we know that the tongue is going to be full of striated muscle, specifically visceral striated muscle. But again, if we showed you something at this kind of magnification where you can't see the surface to know that you're actually on the tongue, you wouldn't be able to say visceral versus skeletal. All right, so striated muscle is fine. If you called it skeletal, striated muscle, that would be okay too, because you can't tell where you really are, okay? Or visceral skeletal, visceral striated muscle. Now, muscle has the same divisions that we see associated with nerves in terms of their connective tissue surrounding them. You're going to have, let's go back to a lower power. You're going to have individual bundles, groups of them, that are going to have some large vessels associated with them, and so you're going to have an epineurium. Let's go up to the circle. So when we look at this and you see this region here where you've got this thickened sort of connective tissue, this is going to be epineurium. Then you're going to see in between here we get these smaller little bundles or fascicles. Epimysium, sorry, you're very fail me for that one. Yeah, so epimysium. Then in between the different fascicles we have perimysium, and then in between each of the individual cells, endomysium. Now what is the endomysium also called? Heard it over here? Basal lamina, okay? So if you were asked to identify that layer, if you called it an endomysium or if you called it a basal lamina, both of those are correct. And remember, when we're looking at these, remember that you can see that the nuclei are dispersed all the way at the edges of the cells. They are not central in the cells. But also remember that depending on the plane of section, sometimes it can be a little bit confusing. So here we have a part of the muscle where you can actually see what looks like a central nucleus. But don't just look at one nucleus or one or two nuclei and say, oh, well, they're central, therefore it must be smooth muscle. All right. Remember that if the majority of these have their nuclei all squeezed off to the sides of the cells, then you're looking in striated muscle. Okay. Now, I wouldn't show you this section and ask you because remember, we're going to have to be able to differentiate this skeletal or visceral striated muscle from cardiac muscle, which is also a striated muscle. But with the cardiac muscle, the cells are going to be the cells will be branched, and there the cells will have centrally located nuclei. And when you see them in cross-section, rather than seeing a nice fairly uniform shape in cross-section, they're going to have some very odd irregular shapes to them. So remember that, and remember this when we start looking at the cardiac muscle. And I guess when we're sitting here, we might as well have a quick quiz on name this structure. If I say name this vessel. If we're vessel, we've got smooth muscle in the wall. It's got a nice round lumen. Arteriole, okay? So in fact, most of these that we see in this particular region are arterioles. Now, name this vessel.
Vein.
That's a vein. All right, so a nice big, very thin-walled vein that you can see. Now, even at this magnification, you can see that we've got these, the banding, and the banding is because you've got a darker layer interspersed with a lighter layer. And so remember, you need to be able to tell which one of these are the I bands and which ones are the A bands. So I bands are light bands, A bands, dark bands. Yes? Probably not, especially if I'm not giving you anything that you can really relate the relative size. So arteriole, artery, probably both would be fine. Yeah. Any other issues with skeletal muscle? Then we'll move on to cardiac.